On night one of the first round of the Democratic presidential debates for the 2020 election, there were no shortage of surprises. The debate featured well-known candidates Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker, and Amy Klobuchar, eager to define themselves as serious potential frontrunners, and a host of minor candidates, Gabbard, Castro, Deblasio, Delaney, Inslee, and Ryan, who needed to convince Democratic voters that they may be worth getting to know a little bit better. For many of these candidates, the evening was an opportunity to create new or renewed excitement for their campaign. For others, it may be the last time they appear on a presidential debate stage.
I didn't say squash them. I didn't say squash them. When we weren't in there, they started flying planes into our buildings. So I'm just saying right now,
the Taliban didn't attack us on 9/11. Al-Qaeda did.
In this video, I'm going to distinguish the winners from the losers. I'll show you some of the biggest moments from the debate and provide a little context for some of the more egregious distortions and false statements. Alright, let's get into it. Prior to the kickoff of the debate, all eyes were on Elizabeth Warren, who's gained a reputation for her strength when it comes to policy details. But throughout the night, Julian Castro clearly emerged as a policy wonk in his own right.
That moms across this country are getting paid less simply because they're women. I would do several things, starting with something we should have done a long time ago, which is to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, finally in this country. And also pursue legislation so that women are paid equal pay for equal work in this country.
The former HUD secretary was especially effective when it came to his signature issue, immigration.
I'm very proud that in April I became the first candidate to put forward a comprehensive immigration plan, and we saw those images. I would sign an executive order that would get rid of Trump's zero-tolerance policy, the Remain in Mexico policy, and the metering policy. This metering policy is basically what prompted Oscar and Valeria to make that risky swim across the river. And then I would follow that up in my first 100 days with immigration reform that would honor asylum claims, that would put undocumented immigrants, as long as they haven't committed a serious crime, on a pathway to citizenship. We need a Marshall Plan for Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, so that people can find safety and opportunity at home instead of coming to the United States. My plan also includes getting rid of Section 1325 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. They use that law, Section 1325, to justify under the law separating little children from their families.
Jose,
and so I want to challenge every single candidate on this stage to support the repeal.
For Castro, the night was a clear win. But with the immigration issue, he didn't just establish himself as a serious, policy-focused candidate, he also severely damaged a popular candidate whose reputation when it comes to policy details leaves much to be desired.
We would not build walls, we would not put kids in cages. In fact, we would spare no expense to reunite the families that have been separated already. And we would not criminally prosecute any family who is fleeing violence and persecution. We would make sure...
Secretary, let him finish, and I will give you his policy. But let him finish. Let him finish, please. Yes.
The reason that they're separating these little children from their families is that they're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them. Some of us on this stage have called to end that section, to terminate it. Some, like Congressman O'Rourke, have not. And I want to challenge all of the candidates to do that.
I helped to introduce legislation that would ensure that we don't criminalize those who are seeking asylum and refuge in this country. If you're fleeing desperation, then I want to make sure that you're treated with respect.
I'm still talking about everybody else.
But you're looking at just one small part of this. I'm talking about a comprehensive rewrite of our immigration laws.
That's not true.
And if we do that, I don't think it's asking too much for people to follow our laws when they come to this country.
Millions of folks, a lot of folks that are coming are not seeking asylum. A lot of them are undocumented immigrants, right? And you said recently that the reason you didn't want to repeal Section 1325 was because you were concerned about human trafficking and drug trafficking. But let me tell you what. Section 18, Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Title 21, and Title 22 already cover human trafficking and drug trafficking. I think that you should do your homework on this issue. If you did your homework on this issue, you would know that we should repeal this section.
That exchange may not have been enough to bury the Texas congressman's campaign, but he had a weak performance throughout much of the night, which began with a transparent attempt at pandering to Latinos with a bizarre and unexpected run in Spanish.
This economy has got to work for everyone. And right now we know that it isn't. And it's going to take all of us coming together to make sure that it does. Necesitamos incluir cada persona en el éxito de esta economía. Pero si queremos hacer eso, necesitamos incluir cada persona en nuestra democracia. Cada votante necesitamos la representación y cada voz necesitamos escuchar.
In any language, Beto failed to respond to the actual question being asked here, which was whether he would support a top marginal tax rate of 70%. The debate moderators generously offered him a do-over.
I'll give you 10 seconds to answer. If you want to answer the direct question, would you support a 70% individual marginal tax rate? Yes, no, or pass?
I would support a tax rate and a tax code that is fair to everyone. Tax capital 70%? At the same rate that you tax ordinary income.
Once again, he failed to answer the question head-on, a pattern he repeated throughout much of the debate. When asked about healthcare and Medicare for all, he decided to use his time to do a classic old-school politician move of telling a story rather than providing specific policy details.
In Laredo, Texas, I met a young man, 27 years old, told me that he'd been to a doctor once in his life. And on that visit, he was told he had diabetes, he was told he had glaucoma, and he was told untreated because he doesn't have health care, he'll be dead before the age of 40.
When pushed on his healthcare stances, Beto provided the opportunity for yet another candidate to dunk on him.
No, I think that choice is fundamental to our ability to get everybody cared for.
Private insurance is not working for tens of millions of Americans. When you talk about the co-pays, the deductibles, the premiums, the out-of-pocket expenses, it's not working.
That's right. So for those for whom it's not working, they can choose Medicare. For the culinary workers in Nevada who I listened to, who negotiated for those plans, they're able to keep them.
Why are you defending private insurance?
Say they like their private health insurance.
Overall, Beto looked weak throughout the night. The debate was definitely a loss for him. One small redemption for Beto was the fact that his little speech in Spanish was only the second most awkward employment of the language in the debate.
La situación ahora es inaceptable. Este presidente ha atacado, ha demonizado los inmigrantes. Es inaceptable y voy a cambiar este.
Esa situación es muy malo por todos los americanos. Donde estás la zapateria? If you don't speak Spanish, don't speak Spanish, dude. But Booker's night wasn't all bad. When talking about the black community, his community, he was able to establish himself as a man of the people by reprising some of his best town hall talking points.
I live in a low-income black and brown community. I see every single day that this economy is not working for average Americans. The indicators that are being used from GDP to Wall Street's rankings is not helping people in my community. It is about time that we have an economy that works for everybody, not just the wealthiest in our nation.
But quickly.
I think I'm the only one, I hope I'm the only one on this panel here that had 7 people shot in their neighborhood just last week. Someone I knew, Shahad Smith, was killed with an assault rifle at the top of my block last year. For millions of Americans, this is not a policy issue. This is an urgency. And for those who have not been directly affected, they're tired of living in a country where their kids go to school to learn about reading, writing, and arithmetic, and how to deal with an active shooter in their school.
Still, he had some very weak moments. He was asked a question in a pretty tricky area for Booker and wasn't wholly honest in his answer.
Should pharmaceutical companies that manufacture these drugs be held criminally liable for what they do?
They should absolutely be held criminally liable because they are liable and responsible. This is one of the reasons why, well before I was running for president, I said I would not take contributions from pharma companies, not take contributions from corporate PACs or pharma executives, because they are part of this problem.
Booker, of course, has a long history of receiving big pharma money and doing the industry's bidding. He may have turned around a bit on this, but that doesn't erase his long history. Just as an example, he helped defeat a drug importation measure introduced by Bernie Sanders and defended the vote with fake concerns about safety. Even Republican Tim Pawlenty was able to dunk on Booker over the insincere argument, writing, "Show me the dead Canadians. Where are the dead Canadians?" And Booker's historic support for Big Pharma is no surprise. As a Think Progress article points out, no Senate Democrat had stronger ties to Big Pharma than Booker. In 2014, Booker raked in $328,000 in campaign boodle from the pharmaceutical and healthcare products industry. Booker was once again either insincere or grotesquely ignorant when he was the only person on the stage to indicate that he would not re-enter the Iran nuclear deal. Here was his explanation for that.
We need to renegotiate and get back into a deal, but I'm not going to have a primary platform to say unilaterally I'm going to rejoin that deal, because when I'm president of the United States, I'm going to do the best I can to secure this country and that region and make sure that if I have an opportunity to leverage a better deal, I'm going to do it.
Okay, that's just nonsense. Despite US withdrawal, the deal is still in effect. China, France, Germany, Russia, the UK, the EU, and Iran are still in the deal. How would President Booker magically unilaterally get Iran to agree to terms that they would not agree to when they had both the US and all these other major countries exerting economic pressure at the same time? There's just no way he can get that additional leverage short of threatening aggression, and the US may have lost a bit of credibility with Iran when Trump withdrew from a signed treaty. Booker is either lying or doesn't know what he's talking about. Either way, it's not a good look. Booker had both good and bad moments in this debate. I certainly don't think it will tank his campaign, but overall, I think it counts as a loss. One of the most surprisingly powerful performances for me came from Mayor Bill Deblasio. Aside from his crushing rebuttals to folks like Beto, he had a commanding presence, backed surprisingly progressive policies, and was the most effective at addressing the need to redefine the Democratic Party as a party for workers.
This is supposed to be the party of working people. Yes, we're supposed to be for a 70% tax rate on the wealthy. Yes, we're supposed to be for free college, free public college for our young people. We are supposed to break up big corporations when they're not serving our democracy. This Democratic Party has to be strong and bold and progressive. And in New York, we've proven that we can do something very different. We can put money back in the hands of working people. And let me tell you, every time you talk about investing in people and their communities, you hear folks say there's not enough money. What I say to them every single time is there's plenty of money in this world. There's plenty of money in this country. It's just in the wrong hands. We Democrats have to fix that.
He also offered a progressive alternative to xenophobia, potentially effective for blue-collar workers in Trump country.
The way that American citizens have been told that immigrants somehow created their misery and their pain and their challenges. For all the American citizens out there who feel you're falling behind, who feel the American dream's not working for you, the immigrants didn't do that to you. The big corporations did that to you.
A big hurdle for the wealthy New Yorker could easily have been making himself appear relatable for average Americans. Here too, he was remarkably effective, with personal stories about his own struggles, for example, raising a black son in America.
For the last 21 years, I've been raising a black son in America. And I have had to have very, very serious talks with my son Dante about how to protect himself on the streets of our city and all over this country, including how to deal with the fact that he has to take special caution because there have been too many tragedies between our young men and our police, too.
He also talked about suffering through the less talked about consequences of war.
This is very personal for me. I know the cost of war. My dad served in the Pacific in World War II. Battle of Okinawa, had half his leg blown off, and he came home with scars, both physical and emotional, and he did not recover. He spiraled downward, and he ultimately took his own life. And that battle didn't kill him, but that war did.
The debate was a clear win for Deblasio. On the opposite end of Deblasio, physically and in effectiveness, was John Delaney. While Deblasio was very effective at getting into the rabble with a strong presence, it didn't work out so well for Delaney when he tried to do the same thing.
Mayor Deblasio, I want to jump in on this for a follow-up. Mayor Deblasio, you're using
we have to actually...
Congressman Delaney, you'll have some time in a moment on this issue. Congressman Delaney, I'll give you some time in a moment. Mayor Deblasio...
When he finally did get a chance to speak, Delaney consistently used the opportunity to lobby against hope.
I think we need to get things done. That's why I believe we need to operate in a bipartisan manner. Listen, I'll sign into law bills that come to the White House that are passed on a party line basis, absolutely. But all the big transformative things we've ever done in this country's history have happened when huge majorities of the American people get behind them, which is why we need real solutions, not impossible promises.
Look, as a fairly progressive person myself, this probably sounds especially bad for me. But I don't think anyone is particularly inspired by a candidate who says he will only back overwhelmingly popular measures and calls change impossible. He sounds self-defeatist and weak. When it came to specifics, Delaney got worse, not better. Despite being a vocal critic of single-payer, he seemed to contradict himself with this claim.
We should give everyone in this country health care as a basic human right for free. Full stop.
But is it really full stop? No.
But we should also give them the option to buy private insurance. Why do we have to stand for taking away something from people?
That's nonsense. Of course, Medicare for All does not actually make private healthcare illegal. It just bans private coverage of things that are already covered by Medicare for All. This is a necessary provision to prevent fraud. I can't sell you something that you are already entitled to as a citizen. But Medicare for All also doesn't fully eliminate private health insurance because premium options not covered by the new system could be purchased on the free market.
And also, it's bad policy. If you go to every hospital in this country and you ask them one question, which is, how would it have been for you last year if every one of your bills were paid at the Medicare rate? Every single hospital administrator said they would close. And the Medicare for All bill requires payments to stay at current Medicare rates. So to some extent, we're basically supporting a bill that will have every hospital closed.
That's obviously nonsense on the face of it. As you all know, there are systems just like Medicare for All in existence all over the developed world. All of these countries, believe it or not, still have hospitals. Very good ones very often. The idea that single payer will wipe out hospitals is really an insane suggestion. I don't know if most Americans will catch the inherent absurdity of what he's saying here, but it would be difficult to not notice his relative weakness on stage. And I know this may be pretty superficial, but after hearing him on and off throughout the 2-hour debate, I couldn't help feeling annoyed by the tenor of his voice. The guy has a pretty grating voice. I doubt Americans want to hear much more of it. I think this debate was a loss for John Delaney. Now, his poor performance was pretty predictable, as was the strong performance of the night's frontrunner, Elizabeth Warren.
What's been missing is courage. Courage in Washington to take on the giants. That's part of the corruption in this system. Where I want to start this is I want to return government to the people, and that means calling out the names of the monopolists and saying I have the courage to go after them.
There were two instances where I was surprised by what Warren had to say. First, on Medicare for All. I had been disappointed by her apparently weakening stance on the issue, but here she seemed to effectively vocalize renewed commitment to the policy.
Medicare for All solves that problem. And I understand. There are a lot of politicians who say, oh, it's just not possible, we just can't do it, have a lot of political reasons for this. What they're really telling you is they just won't fight for it. Well, health care is a basic human right, and I will fight for basic human rights.
Warren also seemed to move in Bernie's direction on a less talked about issue, the need for a real political revolution, and talked about the need to build the progressive movement both inside and outside of government.
And it means that everybody we energize in 2020 stays on the front lines come January 2021. We have to push from the outside, have leadership from the inside, and make this Congress reflect the will of the people.
Expectations were already high for Warren. She exceeded mine. No doubt this was a win for her.
Do you have a plan to deal with Mitch McConnell?
I do.
I was somewhat less impressed by the performance of Tulsi Gabbard, a progressive that I expected a lot from. She started off the night avoiding a question, instead bringing in all her campaign themes into a single response. It's a decent enough strategy for a minor candidate who can expect limited time to talk, but the way Gabbard did it created a kind of awkward moment.
The American people deserve a president who will put your interests ahead of the rich and powerful. That's not what we have right now. And for too long, our leaders have failed us, taking us from one regime change war to the next, leading us into a new Cold War and arms race, costing us trillions of our hard-earned taxpayer dollars and countless lives. I will take your hard-earned taxpayer dollars and instead invest those dollars into serving your needs. Things like health care, a green economy, good-paying jobs, protecting our environment, and so much more.
Mayor.
Please clap. That was a shaky, if forgivable, start. But throughout the night, Tulsi seemed to fail to connect. She usually has a calm, focused presence, but this night, she just seemed tired. To be fair to Tulsi, she was also the biggest victim when it comes to the questions that she was asked. Booker got a bit sweaty when he was asked about Big Pharma, but Tulsi was asked an even tougher question.
One of the first things you did after launching your campaign was to issue an apology to the LGBTQ community about your past stances and statements on gay rights. After the Trump administration's rollbacks of civil rights protections for many in that community, why should voters in that community, or voters that care about this issue in general, trust you now?
Ironically, her response was one of her strongest moments in the debate.
Let me say that there is no one in our government at any level who has the right to tell any American who they should be allowed to love or who they should be allowed to marry. My record in Congress for over 6 years shows my commitment to fighting for LGBTQ equality. I serve on the Equality Caucus and recently voted for passage of the Equality Act. Maybe many people in this country can relate to the fact that I grew up in a socially conservative home, held views when I was very young that I no longer hold today.
But her performance when it came to foreign policy was even better.
The American people need to understand that this war with Iran would be far more devastating, far more costly than anything that we ever saw in Iraq. It would take many more lives. It would exacerbate the refugee crisis. And it wouldn't be just contained within Iran. This would turn into a regional war. Donald Trump and his cabinet, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, and others, are creating a situation that just a spark would light off a war with Iran, which is incredibly dangerous. That's why we need to de-escalate tensions. Trump needs to get back into the Iran nuclear deal and swallow his pride. Put the American people first.
Hey, but wait.
Of course, the most definitive moment for Tulsi, which I believe turned a potential loss into a narrow win, was her crosstalk with Tim Ryan.
We must be engaged in this. We must have our State Department engaged. We must have our military engaged to the extent they need to be. But the reality of it is this president doesn't even have people appointed in the State Department to deal with these things. Whether we're talking about Central America, whether we're talking about Iran, whether we're talking about Afghanistan, we've got to be completely engaged. And here's why. Because these flare-ups distract us from the real problems in the country. If getting drones shot down for $130 million because the president is distracted, that's $130 million that we could be spending in places like Youngstown, Ohio, or Flint, Michigan, or rebuilding.
Congresswoman Gabbard, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, actually, to jump off what he said. He described engagement as the problem. Is that what you will
tell the parents of those 2 soldiers who were just killed in Afghanistan? Well, we just have to be engaged. As a soldier, I will tell you that answer is unacceptable. We have to bring our troops home from Afghanistan. We are in a place in Afghanistan where we have lost so many lives. We've spent so much money, money that's coming out of every one of our pockets, money that should be going into communities here at home, meeting the needs of the people here at home. We are no better off in Afghanistan today than we were when this war began. This is why it's so important to have a president and commander-in-chief who knows the cost of war and who's ready to do the job on day one. I am ready to do that job when I walk into the Oval Office. Thank you very much.
Listen, I'm going to go down the line. I'm going to go down the line here. Well, you know what? You felt like she was responding. You get 30 seconds. Go.
Good man.
Fair enough.
I appreciate that.
I hear what you're saying.
I would just say I don't want to be engaged. I wish we were spending all this money in places that I've represented that have been completely forgotten and we were rebuilding. But the reality of it is, if the United States isn't engaged, the Taliban will grow and they will have bigger, bolder terrorist acts. We have got to have some present there.
The Taliban was there long before we came in. They'll be there long before we leave.
Well,
we cannot keep U.S. troops deployed to Afghanistan thinking that we're going to somehow squash this Taliban that has been there, that every other country that's tried
I didn't say squash them. When we weren't in there, they started flying planes into our buildings. So I'm just saying right now,
the Taliban didn't attack us on 9/11. Al-Qaeda did.
Well, I understand.
Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11.
I understand.
That's why.
Given how unknown Tim Ryan already is, that exchange with Gabbard, in my view, was probably enough to end his campaign. But for good measure, he had a generally awkward, weak, soft performance the whole night.
President Trump, and you just referred to him, promised that manufacturing jobs were all coming back to places like your home state of Ohio. Can you make that same promise?
Yes, I believe you can. But first, let's say the president came. He said, don't sell your house to people in Youngstown, Ohio. And in his administration, just in the last 2 years, we lost $4,000 4,000 jobs at a General Motors facility.
This dude just doesn't seem presidential at all. It's pretty much the performance I expected from him. But for another minor candidate, a weak performance was not my expectation. I thought Jay Inslee just might make his mark in this debate if he demonstrated knowledge and passion for his key issue, the environment. Rachel Maddow gave him that opportunity.
You have staked your candidacy on the issue of climate change. It is first, second, and third priority for you. You said it's all the issues. Let's get specific. We're here in Miami, which is already experiencing serious flooding on sunny days as a result of sea level rise. Parts of Miami Beach and the Keys could be underwater in our lifetimes. Does your plan save Miami?
His response fell a bit flat.
Yes, first by taking away the filibuster from Mitch McConnell to start with.
Yeah, as president, you don't actually get to control the procedural rules in the Senate.
To feel the sting of climate change. And we are the last that can do something about it. Our towns are burning, our fields are flooding, Miami is inundated. And we have to understand, this is a climate crisis, an emergency. And it is our last chance in the administration, next one, to do something about it.
That was a missed opportunity, and Inslee isn't likely to get many more. This debate was a loss for him, not just for his failure to articulate his central campaign promise, but because he got dunked on by a fairly weak competitor.
And I am the only candidate here who has passed a law protecting a woman's right of reproductive health and health insurance.
I just want to say there's 3 women up here that have fought pretty hard for a woman's right to choose. So I'll start with that.
Unfortunately for Klobuchar, that was definitely her strongest moment in the debate, and I don't think that's enough for a medium-level candidate with declining poll numbers. For the rest of the debate, she had a fairly middling performance, tepid amounts of energy, and constantly repeating the mistake of making every answer about Donald Trump.
Well, first, the economy. We know that not everyone is sharing in this prosperity, and Donald Trump just sits in the White House and gloats about what's going on when you have so many people that are having trouble affording college. The president literally went on TV, on Fox, and said that people's heads would spin when they see how much he would bring down pharmaceutical prices. Instead, 2,500 drugs have gone up in double digits since he came into office.
Klobuchar didn't totally flop, but she failed to establish herself as a serious contender. I think that's gotta count as a loss.
That's what we call at home, all foam and no beer.
In the end, for me, the winners of this debate were Warren, Castro, Deblasio, and Gabbard. It was a net loss for everyone else. But for candidates like Booker and O'Rourke, I feel like this debate will probably preempt a fall in the polls. For Inslee, Delaney, and almost certainly Ryan, this may mark the end of their campaigns. That's the way I saw this debate, but I'm eager to hear from you guys, so let me know in the comments what you think.